Before we dive into this chilling and mysterious story, please remember to subscribe to the channel Crimson Romance Stories and like this video. Every subscription, like and share from you is a huge spiritual gift and an incredibly profound source of motivation for the channel's growth, so we can continue bringing wonderful videos every day to everyone. There would be no greater joy than receiving your love and support through the comments you leave right below this video. Comments sharing your emotions or telling us which province or city you're living and working in while listening to this story. Alright, let's continue together and immerse ourselves in this amazing, captivating story that's filled with deep emotions. I sat alone in the dim light of my penthouse office, high above Manhattan, the endless glow of New York City stretching out beneath me like a restless ocean of light. The apartment took up the entire top floor of a tower I owned on the Upper East Side. Silent, cavernous, cold. Too many rooms, too much marble, too many reminders of everything I had and no one to share it with. My fair skin felt chilled despite the warmth of the room. I poured a glass of bourbon and stared at the small ancestral altar in the corner. Photographs of my Korean parents who had come to this country with nothing, an offering bowl, a stick of incense I lit only when the guilt became unbearable. They had dreamed of honor, of a legitimate life. Instead, I had built an empire in the shadows. Underground gambling rings in Koreatown down in Midtown, protection money from restaurants and clubs, real estate holdings that hid it all. Money that could buy anything, power that made men kneel, and yet inside me, a fracture that grew wider every day. Loneliness clawed at my chest, guilt over the lives I had ruined gnawed without mercy, and a violent inner storm kept me awake night after night. At 60, the thought of leaving this world with no heir, no one to carry even a fragment of my parents' hope, tore my heart apart. My phone vibrated. It was Marcus, my driver. "They're here, Mr. Kang." I straightened my suit, slipped the mask of absolute control over my face, and walked to the private elevator. Down in the lobby, the armored SUV pulled into the underground garage. I watched on the security feed as the door opened. First came Robert Thompson, a man in his 50s crushed by his own mistakes, face pale, shoulders hunched in defeat. He owed me $3 million, debts from my gambling tables that had spiraled out of control. No bank would touch him now. Then she stepped out, Aaliyah Thompson, 19 years old. The sight of her hit me like a punch to the soul. David American, painfully thin from constant hunger, her dark skin marked by exhaustion and cold. Her thrift store coat was too thin for the biting December wind that whipped through the city streets she must have walked for years. Hollow cheeks, shadowed eyes that had not known real sleep in who knows how long, cracked lips from nights spent shivering in apartments with broken heat. She clutched a small, torn backpack, her body trembling slightly, powerless, hopeless, the kind of despair that comes from eviction notices, empty refrigerators, and humiliation that never ends. She looked destitute, beaten down by a world that had shown her nothing but cruelty. It was not love at first. It was a transaction, cold and simple. She was young and healthy. She could give me the air I needed to secure everything I had built and erase her father's debt. In that moment, I felt no respect for her, only ruthless need. But then something exploded inside me, fierce and burning, an overwhelming surge of raw affection that anchored itself in my chest and refused to let go. Guilt ripped through me instantly. How could I treat her like this? Yet the loneliness, the fracture in my heart, screamed for her to fill it. My mind warred violently, dominance against sudden, aching tenderness. Robert whispered something to her, his voice shaking. She answered softly, timidly, with the restrained respect of someone young speaking to unseen power. "Dad, you said this was just a quick meeting. It's so cold out here." They were escorted up. When the elevator doors opened into my penthouse, the contrast was brutal. My world of polished hardwood floors, walls of glass overlooking Central Park, the faint scent of expensive leather and bourbon against her raw poverty, the faint smell of cold streets and cheap soap clinging to her coat. Robert could barely look at me. Aaliyah stepped inside, eyes wide with confusion that quickly turned to fear. She swayed a little, dizzy from hunger or shock, one hand pressing to her forehead as disorientation washed over her. She stared at the opulence, then at me, voice soft and cautious. "Sir, what is this place?" "Sit," I said, my voice low and steady, hiding the storm inside. They sat on the leather couch. Aaliyah perched on the very edge, hands clasped tight, knuckles pale. Up close, the heartbreak was unbearable. Emaciated frame, undernourished skin, the humiliation of worn sneakers in a home where one painting cost more than she had seen in her lifetime. The city outside had crushed her family without mercy. Job loss, medical bills, a system that offered no way out for a young black woman fighting to survive. Robert started stammering excuses. I silenced him with a glance and turned to Aaliyah. She met my eyes for a second, curious beneath the fear, then looked down respectfully. Inside me, guilt crashed like a wave. How could I speak to her this way? The transactional cruelty tore at my heart even as the fierce affection burned hotter, demanding I protect her from everything, even from myself. Robert stared at the floor in shame. Aaliyah's eyes filled with tears, confusion and dread swirling as she whispered, voice small and shaking, "Please, sir, I don't understand." Outside, the city roared on, indifferent. Down in Koreatown, rivals were already moving against me. I had broken up a 10th Street confrontation just yesterday. Fists and warnings, no blood but plenty of threats. Danger circled constantly. Yet here, in this quiet penthouse, fate had brought her to me. It began as nothing more than a heartless deal, with no respect for the terrified girl before me. But already, something deep inside my fractured soul had begun to rupture, pulling me toward her with a passion I could not control. I watched her face as the words left my mouth, those crude, possessive declarations that still hung heavy in the silent penthouse like a storm cloud refusing to break. Aaliyah's dark eyes brimmed with tears that refused to fall, her thin frame curling inward on the leather couch as if she could fold herself away from the humiliation I had just inflicted. Her hands trembled between her knees, knuckles pale against her skin, and she kept her head bowed, voice emerging only as a faint, broken whisper. "Please, sir, I don't understand what's happening." Robert Thompson sat beside her, a defeated shell of a man in his 50s, his face ashen and slick with sweat, unable to lift his eyes to mine or to his daughter's. The vast room, with its polished hardwood floors and walls of glass framing the glittering expanse of Central Park below, felt suddenly suffocating. The contrast between my world, opulent, controlled, untouchable, and hers, marked by the faint scent of cold city streets clinging to her worn coat, struck me anew with brutal force. Guilt crashed over me like a violent tide, nearly stealing my breath. How had I allowed those words to escape my lips? I, Ji-hoon Kang, who had built an empire on calculated silence and unyielding control, had reduced this fragile, starving girl to a transaction of flesh and future. The cold calculation that had sustained me for decades now felt like acid eating through my soul. Remorse gnawed deeper, a relentless beast awakening after years of suppression. Yet intertwined with it, that fierce, explosive surge of affection burned uncontrollably, an overwhelming, passionate attachment that anchored itself in my chest and demanded I claim her, protect her, cherish her beyond reason. My heart warred in chaos, the ruthless boss who needed an heir, against the fractured man who suddenly ached to wrap her in warmth and safety. The inner turmoil intensified, tearing at me with fresh violence. I was a monster, yes, but one whose loneliness screamed for her light. I turned from them, striding to the windows, staring out at the bare trees of Central Park under the harsh December wind. The city sprawled endlessly below, a kingdom I ruled from the shadows. Koreatown's neon-lit streets in Midtown my true domain, where gambling halls and protection rackets fed my legitimate real estate holdings. Rivals from the Russian crews and Chinatown triads constantly probed for weakness. Just last week, on a frigid night, I had stepped into an unexpected street confrontation outside one of my karaoke clubs. 4 men encircling my enforcer, Threats hissed under breath, hands hovering near concealed weapons. I had appeared from the shadows, my presence alone diffusing the tension. No blows landed, only warnings exchanged in low voices. But the danger lingered, a constant hum beneath the city's roar. Behind me, Robert's voice finally broke the silence, hoarse and pleading. "Mr. Kang, I swear, I can find a way to pay. Just a little more time, please don't drag her into this." I turned slowly, my face a mask of stone, though inside the storm raged. $3 million, Robert, compounded daily, you have nothing. No home, no assets, no hope. My words were measured, but the remorse twisted sharper. I hated crushing men like him, yet it was the foundation of my power. Aaliyah lifted her head fractionally, confusion deepening into dread. Her exhausted eyes flickered with unease, then fear as the reality settled. She swayed slightly, dizziness evident from days of hunger and sleepless nights in drafty apartments. Cold winds cutting through thin walls back in whatever crumbling neighborhood they had fled. The irrational cruelty of fate, punished for her father's weakness, her young life derailed by debts she never incurred, crushed her visibly. A soft gasp escaped her, and she pressed a hand to her temple, disorientation washing over her features, followed by a numb withdrawal, as if her spirit retreated to survive the pain. Robert stammered on. "She's innocent. She's supposed to start college next semester." "Then you should have considered her future before losing everything at my tables," I replied, voice low but edged with the dominance that made men obey. Yet even as I spoke, tenderness surged unbidden. I wanted to promise her education, security, a life free from the humiliation of food stamps and eviction notices that had marked her existence. I stepped closer, fixing my gaze on Aaliyah. She met it briefly, cautious curiosity flickering beneath the fear, then looked down respectfully, her voice emerging soft and timid. "Sir, marriage? To you? I'm only 19. I've never even—" Her words trailed off, choked by shock. Robert pleaded again, desperation rising. "There has to be another way. Sell something, anything." I silenced him with a raised hand. "There is no other way." Then, to Aaliyah, softer than I intended, the passionate attachment breaking through. "Your father's debt vanishes entirely. You live here, in safety and comfort. You want for nothing, food, warmth, protection. And in time, you give me the air my legacy requires." Her tears spilled then, silent trails down hollow cheeks. She wiped them away quickly, ashamed, her emaciated frame shaking. Heartbreaking poverty had sculpted her, undernourished, battered by relentless cold nights on streets where hope died young, especially for a young African-American woman facing a system stacked with injustice. Denied aid, overlooked opportunities, cruel misfortune piling upon misfortune. "And if I refuse?" she whispered, voice restrained, respectful despite the terror. The silence stretched, heavy. "Your father suffers the consequences, slowly, irreversibly, and you return to your life, only emptier, with doors closed forever." She flinched, a quiet sob escaping. The absurdity of it all, the harsh fate that bound her to me, tore at her and at me. My remorse peaked violently. How could I inflict this? Yet the burning affection anchored deeper. I would shield her from further cruelty, even if I was its source. Robert began begging anew, but I dismissed him with a gesture. Mrs. Hahn appeared to escort them, Aaliyah to a guest suite, Robert to a separate room under watch. As I passed the small ancestral altar in the hallway, framed photos of my parents, simple offerings on the Jesa table, I paused, guilt crashing anew. They had sacrificed everything for my success in America, dreaming of honor. Instead, I perpetuated darkness. In the quiet that followed, I poured bourbon, reflecting on the tenderness already blooming amid the chaos. A quiet moment of condensed emotion. I imagined her fed, rested, safe in my arms. Yet the drama escalated in my mind, rivals sensing weakness if this deal leaked, the inner rupture threatening to consume me. Hours later, alone, the turmoil intensified. I stood at the window again, city lights blurring. Down in Koreatown, another confrontation brewed. I had received word of scouts near my properties, but here, fate had delivered Aaliyah. Though it began in suspicion and heartless transaction, the passionate love surging within me promised transformation. I would protect her fiercely, rescue her from the abyss, even as my fractured heart bled with remorse. She had until morning to decide, and in that waiting, my inner conflict raged on, drawing me inexorably toward her with a depth I had never known. I did not sleep that night. The penthouse was silent except for the distant hum of the city far below, but inside my chest a war raged without pause. I stood for hours at the window overlooking Central Park, bourbon untouched on the table, staring at the bare branches whipping in the December wind. The cold glass reflected my face, fair-skinned, sharp-featured, the face of a man who had taken everything he wanted in this country my parents had fled to for a better life. They had crossed oceans with nothing but hope, and I had turned their sacrifice into an empire of shadows. Guilt over that legacy had always simmered, but tonight it boiled, violent and unrelenting. How could I drag an innocent girl into this darkness? Yet the thought of letting her go, of sending her back to the freezing streets, to hunger that carved hollows in her cheeks, to a life of relentless injustice, tore at me with equal ferocity. And beneath both guilt and fear burned that fierce, overwhelming passion. It had struck the moment I saw her step from the car, frail and freezing, and it refused to be reasoned away. I wanted her, not just as a vessel for an heir, not just to erase a debt, but with a depth that terrified me. A burning need to protect, to provide, to watch color return to her face and strength to her body. It was irrational, explosive, an emotional rupture in a heart that had long been fractured and carefully guarded. Morning came gray and bitter. December 20th, 2025. I had Mrs. Han prepare breakfast in the main dining room, simple but nourishing food I suspected Aaliyah had not seen in months. Warm oatmeal, fresh fruit, eggs, toast with butter melting golden. Things that to me were ordinary, but to her would be luxury beyond imagining. When they were brought in, Robert looked as though he had aged 10 years overnight. His eyes were red, shoulders slumped in utter defeat. Aaliyah walked beside him, guided gently by Mrs. Han, and the sight of her nearly stopped my heart. She had bathed, Mrs. Han had seen to that, and wore one of my soft cashmere sweaters that hung loose on her thin frame, sleeves rolled several times. Her hair was pulled back simply, revealing the delicate bone structure hunger had sharpened. She moved cautiously, eyes downcast, every step uncertain on the polished floors. Exhaustion still clung to her like a second skin. Dark circles shadowed her eyes from another sleepless night, and she swayed slightly as she walked, dizziness from low blood sugar and shock. They sat at the long mahogany table that could seat 20. Aaliyah perched on the edge of her chair, hands folded tightly in her lap, posture speaking of powerlessness and dread. When Mrs. Han placed a plate in front of her, she stared at it as though unsure it was real. Her fingers trembled as she picked up a spoon. "Eat," I said quietly from the head of the table. She glanced up at me, fearful, cautious, a flicker of curiosity beneath, then back at the food. Slowly, respectfully, she murmured, "Thank you, sir," and began to eat in small, careful bites, as if afraid it might vanish. Robert barely touched his plate. He kept his eyes on the tablecloth, shame radiating from him. I let the silence stretch, watching her. Each spoonful she took felt like a small victory and a deeper condemnation of myself. This girl, 19 years old, emaciated from months of skipped meals, battered by cold winds through cracked windows and thin coats, now sat in my palace because of her father's weakness and my ruthless need. The contrast was obscene. My wealth that could buy entire buildings against her poverty that left her dizzy from hunger. Irrational injustice crushed her at every turn, denied scholarships because of bureaucratic errors, jobs lost to illness without insurance, a system that punished the poor with compounding cruelty. And now I was adding my own weight to that burden. The remorse inside me intensified, gnawing until I could barely sit still. Yet the passionate attachment surged alongside it, demanding I keep her here, safe, fed, warm. Finally, I spoke. "Have you decided?" Robert flinched. Aaliyah froze, spoon halfway to her mouth. She set it down carefully, hands shaking, and looked at me with wide, frightened eyes. Confusion and dread warred openly on her face. She swallowed hard, voice emerging soft, restrained, timid. "Sir, I talked with my dad all night. He told me everything, how deep the debt is, how there's no way out." A pause, her breath catching. "I don't want him to suffer because of me. I don't want to go back to how things were." Her words cracked something inside me. Back to how things were, eviction notices taped to doors, nights shivering under threadbare blankets, hunger so sharp it kept her awake, humiliation of begging for extensions on bills that never stopped coming. Tears welled in her eyes again, but she blinked them back, trying to stay composed in front of me. "So you agree?" I asked, keeping my voice steady though my heart thundered. She nodded once, small and hesitant. "Yes, sir. I'll marry you." The words came out barely audible, laced with fear and resignation. Immediately after, dizziness seemed to strike. She gripped the table edge, face paling, breath shallow. Mrs. Hahn moved a steadier, but I was there first, rising, crossing the distance in 3 strides, my hand on her shoulder before I could think. She tensed under my touch, but did not pull away. Up close, I could feel the fragility of her, bones too prominent, skin chilled despite the warmth of the room. The contact sent that burning affection roaring through me, almost unbearable in its intensity. "Breathe," I said softly, surprising myself with the gentleness. "You're safe here." She looked up at me, eyes searching mine, confused, cautious, a spark of desperate curiosity. For a moment, the fear receded slightly, replaced by something fragile and wondering. Then shame flooded back, and she dropped her gaze. "I'm sorry, sir. I haven't eaten like this in a long time." The confession hit me like a blade. Remorse and tenderness collided violently within me. I wanted to pull her into my arms, to promise her she would never know hunger again. Instead, I released her shoulder and returned to my seat, the inner conflict tearing wider. Robert finally spoke, voice breaking. "Thank you, Mr. Kang, for giving her this chance." I did not acknowledge him. My focus remained on Aaliyah as she resumed eating, slower now, each bite a small act of survival. Later that morning, I had the papers drawn up, a simple civil ceremony to be performed in the penthouse by a judge I kept on retainer. No guests, no celebration, just legal binding. While we waited, my phone buzzed with reports from Koreatown. Rivals were moving, Russian crew pushing into one of my blocks, testing boundaries. I left briefly, taking the elevator down to street level. In a narrow alley behind a karaoke bar I owned, I found the confrontation already underway, 3 of my men facing 5 from the opposition, tension thick, words sharp. I stepped between them, my presence alone shifting the balance. No blows were thrown, only cold stares and promises of retaliation. But the message was clear. My empire was watched, and any sign of weakness would be exploited. When I returned, the judge had arrived. Aaliyah stood in the living room in a simple white dress Mrs. Hahn had provided, elegant but modest, hanging loosely on her frame. She looked ethereal and heartbreakingly fragile, eyes downcast, hands clasped to hide their tremble. The ceremony was brief, mechanical, vows spoken in quiet voices. When I slid the ring, a platinum band with a single flawless diamond, onto her finger, her hand shook so badly I had to steady it with mine. She whispered, "I do," in that same soft, respectful tone, fear and confusion radiating from her. And then it was done. Aaliyah Thompson became Aaliyah Kang. Robert was escorted out shortly after, his debt erased, but his access to her severed. He wept as he left, begging her forgiveness. She stood silent, tears streaming, until the elevator doors closed. The penthouse felt suddenly enormous and empty again. She stood in the center of the living room, looking lost, swaying slightly as another wave of dizziness struck. I moved to her side, guiding her to a sofa. "Rest," I said, voice low. "You're exhausted." She obeyed without protest, curling into the corner of the couch like a wounded animal seeking shelter. Her eyes followed me, wary, curious, afraid. "Sir, what happens now?" The question hung between us, heavy with implication. The transactional brutality of our beginning loomed, yet the passionate love surging in me demanded something different. I knelt in front of her, an act no one in my world had ever seen, bringing my eyes level with hers. "Now you heal," I said quietly. "You eat, you sleep, you grow strong. Nothing more is required of you tonight, or any night, until you are ready." The shock flickered across her face, followed by deep confusion and the faintest glimmer of fragile hope. Tears welled again. Why would you wait?" "Because I am already lost to you," I thought, the words burning unspoken. "Because the thought of forcing you breaks something in me I cannot name." Instead, I simply said, "Because you deserve better than cruelty." She searched my face, disorientation deepening into something softer, more vulnerable. Then exhaustion won, her eyes fluttered closed, head drooping against the cushion. I stayed there, watching her sleep, the first real rest she had likely known in months. The contrast between us remained stark, my power and wealth against her destitution and pain. But in that quiet, emotionally condensed moment, tenderness bloomed alongside the remorse and burning passion. Outside, the city churned on, rivals circling, but inside these walls, something irrevocable had begun. Though rooted in ruthless necessity and unfair fate, the love anchoring my fractured heart promised, against all reason, to transform us both. The ring felt heavy on her finger, a cold circle of platinum and diamond that caught the afternoon light streaming through the vast windows. Aaliyah stood motionless in the center of the living room after the judge had left, staring at her hand as though it belonged to someone else. The simple white dress Mrs. Hahn had chosen for her hung loosely on her thin frame, the fabric whispering against skin that had known only threadbare clothes and constant cold. She swayed slightly, dizziness returning in a slow wave, hunger not yet fully banished, shock settling deep into her bones, the emotional numbness that follows a blow too sudden to process. I watched her from across the room, my chest tight with a turmoil that had not eased since the moment she whispered, "I do." The ceremony had been brief, almost clinical. No music, no flowers, no witnesses beyond Mrs. Hahn and two of my most trusted men. Robert had been allowed to watch from the doorway, tears streaming silently down his face. But the second the papers were signed, he was escorted out. His debt was erased, his daughter now legally mine, and he would never again set foot in this penthouse unless I permitted it. I told myself it was mercy. The gnawing remorse inside me called it cruelty. Aaliyah's soft voice broke the silence, barely above a whisper, restrained and respectful as always. "Sir, is it really over? Are we married now?" The question carried layers of fear, confusion, and fragile disbelief. She looked up at me then, dark eyes wide and searching, caution etched in every line of her face. In that gaze, I saw the full weight of the unfairness that had crushed her life. A father's addiction dragging her into ruin, a system that offered no safety net, cold nights spent curled against drafty walls praying the heat would not be shut off again. And now this, sold, essentially, to a man 3 times her age whose world she could not even imagine. "Yes," I answered, my voice quieter than I intended. "It is done. You are Aaliyah Kang now." The name sounded foreign on my tongue, and it clearly struck her like a physical blow. She pressed a hand to her chest, breath catching, dizziness deepening until she had to reach for the back of a nearby chair to steady herself. Emotional rupture showed plainly, tears welled, spilled over, and she wiped them away quickly, ashamed to cry in front of me. "I'm sorry, sir," she murmured, voice trembling. I never thought." She could not finish. The sentence dissolved into a soft, pained exhale. I crossed the distance between us slowly, deliberately, stopping an arm's length away so as not to frighten her further. The burning passion that had anchored itself in my heart since the first moment I saw her surged again, almost painful in its intensity. I wanted to pull her close, to promise that no harm would ever touch her again, that every cold night and empty stomach was behind her forever. But I held back, the inner conflict tearing at me with renewed violence. I had forced this upon her. My need for an heir, my ruthless calculation, had overridden every shred of decency. Remorse clawed deeper, mingling with the fierce tenderness until I could barely breathe. "You have nothing to apologize for," I said. "Come, you need rest." Mrs. Hahn appeared as if summoned by instinct, ready to guide Aaliyah to the master suite that was now, by law, hers as well. But Aaliyah hesitated, looking at me with cautious curiosity beneath the fear. "Sir, where will you sleep?" The question was innocent, born of dread, and it pierced me. She expected demands, expected the crude words I'd spoken yesterday to become reality tonight. The thought of her bracing for that, of her thin, exhausted body tensing in anticipation of force, sent a wave of self-loathing through me so powerful I nearly staggered. I kept my voice steady. "There is a sitting room attached to the master bedroom. I will sleep there tonight, and every night until you tell me otherwise." Shock flickered across her face, followed by deep confusion and the faintest, most fragile glimmer of relief. She searched my eyes again, trying to understand this man who had bought her yet now offered restraint. "Why?" she whispered, so softly I almost missed it. "Because forcing you would destroy something in me I am only now discovering exists," I thought. "Because the love I feel for you, impossible, overwhelming, immediate, demands I earn what I have taken." Instead, I said only, "Because you have been through enough." Mrs. Hahn gently took her arm, and Aaliyah allowed herself to be led away. At the hallway entrance she paused, looking back at me once more, timid, respectful, but with a spark of something new. Cautious wonder. Then she disappeared behind the double doors. I stood alone in the vast living room, the city glittering coldly beyond the glass. The fracture in my soul widened further. I had secured my heir's mother, erased a debt, asserted my power, and yet I had never felt less in control. My phone vibrated, urgent messages from Koreatown. The Russians had escalated. A shipment of mine had been delayed at a warehouse they influenced, a bold move meant to test me now that word of my sudden marriage was beginning to circulate in the shadows. Weakness was blood in the water. I left the penthouse within the hour, taking the private elevator down to the garage. The drive to Midtown was swift, my driver navigating through holiday traffic while I sat in silence. The image of Aaliyah's tear-streaked face burned behind my eyes. The confrontation unfolded in a narrow alley behind one of my largest gambling halls. 6 of my men faced 8 from the Russian crew, tension thick enough to cut. No weapons drawn yet, but hands hovered close. The air smelled of snow and cigarette smoke. I stepped out of the car and walked directly into the center, my presence shifting the balance instantly. The leader, a thick-necked man named Victor, met my gaze with calculated disrespect. "Congratulations on the wedding, Kang," he said in heavily accented English, smirking. "Young bride, very fertile choice." Rage flared hot and sudden, but I kept it leashed. The insult was meant to provoke, to see if domestic distraction had softened me. I stepped closer, voice low and icy. "Mind your tongue, Victor. My personal life is not your concern, but this warehouse delay is." We spoke for 10 minutes, threats veiled as negotiation, boundaries redrawn. No violence erupted. My reputation and the quiet promise in my eyes were enough. They backed down. The shipment would move by morning. But the message lingered. They smelled opportunity. When I returned to the penthouse hours later, the December night had deepened, snow beginning to fall in fat, silent flakes against the windows. The corridors were hushed. I paused outside the master bedroom doors, hand resting on the handle, heart pounding with a mixture of longing and dread. Quietly, I entered the sitting room that adjoined the bedroom. A sofa had been prepared with linens and pillows. Through the open connecting door, I could see her, Aaliyah asleep on the vast king bed, curled into a small ball beneath layers of blankets, the diamond on her finger catching the faint city glow. She looked impossibly young, impossibly fragile. Exhaustion had finally claimed her. Her breathing was deep and even, the first true rest she had likely known in years. I stood in the doorway a long while, simply watching. The contrast struck me anew. My world of limitless wealth, private medical staff on call, walk-in closets larger than her former home, food prepared by a chef who had trained in Paris, against the heartbreaking poverty that had shaped her. Sleepless nights listening for eviction enforcers, hunger sharp enough to double her over, cold winds finding every crack in thin walls. And I had added the final injustice, forcing marriage upon her to serve my need. Remorse and passionate love collided in a violent peak, nearly bringing me to my knees. Tears, unfamiliar, unwelcome, burned at the edges of my vision. I had lived 60 years armored against weakness, yet this 19-year-old girl, destitute and terrified, had ruptured every defense. In that quiet, emotionally condensed moment of reflection, tenderness rose above the chaos. I made silent vows. She would never know hunger again, never cold, never fear. I would protect her with every resource at my command, even if it meant dismantling parts of the empire that threatened her safety. The love anchoring my heart, fierce, immediate, overwhelming, demanded nothing less. I turned away at last, closing the connecting door softly, and lay on the sofa fully clothed. Sleep did not come easily. Outside, snow muffled the city, and rivals circled in the dark. Inside, a new life had begun, one rooted in ruthless necessity and cruel fate, yet already blooming with a passion I could no longer deny. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, in the hush of falling snow, I allowed myself one truth. Aaliyah Kang was mine to protect, to cherish, to love, even if she never returned it. And that realization, terrifying and redemptive, was the only peace my fractured heart could find. The night after the ceremony stretched long and restless. I lay on the sofa in the sitting room, fully dressed, staring at the shadowed ceiling while snow tapped softly against the windows. Through the connecting door, left slightly ajar so I could hear if she needed anything, I listened to Aaliyah's breathing. It was shallow at first, uneven with lingering fear, then gradually deepened into the slow rhythm of true exhaustion, finally claiming victory. She had not slept properly in months, perhaps years. Hunger, cold, worry, they had been her constant companions. Now, in the vast bed that dwarfed her fragile frame, she slept beneath blankets warmer than any she had ever owned, and the knowledge of that small mercy both soothed and tormented me. I did not sleep. The inner fracture widened with every passing hour. Remorse gnawed relentlessly. I had taken a 19-year-old girl who had already suffered too much and bound her to me with chains of debt and law. My crude words from the first meeting still echoed in my mind, shameful and unforgivable. Yet the passionate love that had ignited the moment I saw her refused to be dimmed by guilt. It burned brighter, demanding I prove myself worthy of the trust I had not earned. The conflict was violent, tearing at my heart until I felt raw inside. A man of immense power reduced to silent agony over a sleeping girl in the next room. Dawn crept in pale and cold on December 21st, 2025. I rose quietly, showered in the guest bath, and dressed in a fresh suit. When I entered the bedroom, Aaliyah was awake, sitting up against the headboard, knees drawn to her chest beneath the heavy duvet. The diamond on her finger caught the weak morning light as her hands clutched the fabric. She looked small, lost, the white nightgown Mrs. Han had provided swallowing her thin shoulders. Her eyes found mine immediately, fearful, cautious, but threaded with that same fragile curiosity I had glimpsed before. "Good morning," I said softly, stopping at the foot of the bed. She startled slightly, then nodded, voice timid and respectful. "Good morning, sir." A pause, her gaze dropping. I didn't know if I should get up or wait." "You may do whatever you wish," I replied. "This is your home now." The words seemed to unsettle her further. She glanced around the enormous room, silk drapes, antique furniture, artwork worth millions, and then back at me, confusion deepening. "It doesn't feel like home," she whispered, so quietly I almost missed it. Then, as if afraid she had spoken out of turn, she added quickly, "I'm sorry, sir. I didn't mean—" "There is no need to apologize," I interrupted gently. "Not ever, not to me." Shock flickered across her face, followed by disorientation. She pressed a hand to her forehead, dizziness returning, likely from the sudden shift in blood sugar after days of proper meals, or simply from the overwhelming strangeness of safety. I moved to her side without thinking, sitting on the edge of the bed and steadying her shoulder. She tensed but did not pull away. "Breathe slowly," I said. "You are safe." Her eyes searched mine again, wide and uncertain. "Why are you being kind?" The question came out raw, edged with the pain of a lifetime expecting cruelty. The truth that an overwhelming, fiercely passionate love had seized me and refused to let go could not yet be spoken. Instead, I answered with part of it. "Because you deserve kindness, and because I choose to give it." Tears welled instantly. She tried to blink them back, but one escaped, tracing down her hollow cheek. The sight ruptured something deep inside me. I reached out, slowly, giving her time to refuse, and brushed the tear away with my thumb. Her skin was soft, chilled. She trembled under the touch, but leaned into it almost imperceptibly, as though warmth was a foreign language her body instinctively craved. In that quiet, emotionally condensed moment, tenderness rose like a tide. I wanted to gather her close, to shield her from every memory of cold winds and empty cupboards, but I withdrew my hand, respecting the boundary she needed. Mrs. Hahn knocked softly and entered with a breakfast tray. Warm porridge, fresh fruit, yogurt, toast. Simple, nourishing foods chosen to ease a stomach long accustomed to scarcity. Aaliyah's eyes widened at the sight, hunger warring with caution. "Eat," I encouraged. "As much as you want, there will always be more." She picked up the spoon with trembling fingers, taking small bites at first, then larger as instinct took over. I watched, the contrast piercing me anew. My wealth that commanded private chefs and imported delicacies against the heartbreaking poverty that had taught her to eat quickly before food disappeared. My phone vibrated repeatedly, updates from Koreatown. The Russians had not backed down fully. A protection payment from one of my restaurants had been delayed by interference. I excused myself, promising to return soon. The drive south was swift. Snow still dusted the streets, holiday lights twinkling prematurely. The confrontation unfolded outside a small family-owned barbecue place I protected. 4 of my men stood tense against 6 Russians, words sharp, postures aggressive. The restaurant owner, a Korean immigrant who had built his business from nothing, watched fearfully from the doorway. I stepped from the car and walked directly into the circle. Silence fell instantly. The Russian lieutenant smirked, but could not hide the flicker of unease. "Problem?" I asked calmly. "Your people are slow with payments," he said. "My people pay on time," I replied. "Your people are blocking delivery trucks. Tell them to stand down." We spoke for minutes, cold negotiation laced with threat. No hands raised, no weapons shown, but the danger hung thick. In the end, they retreated, promises of clear roads by evening. But the message was clear: they would keep pushing. When I returned to the penthouse hours later, snow on my coat, I found Aaliyah in the living room, standing at the windows overlooking the park. She had changed into soft lounge clothes Mrs. Hahn provided, still too large but clean and warm. She turned as I entered, caution in her posture, but her eyes held less fear than before. "You're back," she said softly. "Is everything okay?" The simple concern, directed at me, her captor-turned husband, struck deep. "Yes," I answered, "business." She nodded, then hesitated. "Sir, may I ask something?" "Always." "Why did you sleep on the sofa last night?" Her voice was timid, respectful, but curiosity burned bright. "I thought, after what you said when we first met, that you would—" She trailed off, cheeks flushing with remembered humiliation. The crude words I had spoken rushed back, shameful and searing. Remorse peaked violently. I crossed to her, stopping close but not touching. "I spoke like a brute," I said quietly. I regret those words more than you can know. I will never force you, Aaliyah. Not tonight. Not any night. When or if you come to me, it will be because you choose it freely. Shock widened her eyes. Disorientation followed, then a wave of something softer, relief, confusion, the faintest dawn of trust. Tears spilled again. She swayed, dizziness returning with the emotional surge, and I caught her elbows gently to steady her. I don't understand you, she whispered, voice breaking. You could take whatever you want. You bought me, but you're waiting. I guided her to the sofa, sitting beside her but leaving space. I did not buy you, I said, the lie bitter on my tongue because it was half true. I erased a debt, and now I wait because forcing you would destroy something precious, something I only realized existed when I saw you. Her breathing hitched. She searched my face, cautious wonder growing. You don't even know me. I know enough, I replied. I know you have suffered more than anyone should. I know you are strong because you are still standing. And I know, my voice roughened with the intensity of the passion anchoring my heart, that I will wait as long as it takes. Silence stretched, heavy with unspoken emotion. Outside, snow fell thicker, muffling the city. Inside, in this quiet moment of tenderness and reflection, the first fragile bridge formed between us. She leaned back against the cushions, exhaustion returning. I'm scared, she admitted in a small voice. I know, I said, but you are safe. Sleep if you need. I will be here. She closed her eyes, body relaxing inch by inch. As sleep reclaimed her, I remained beside her, watching over the girl fate and my own ruthlessness had delivered to me. Rivals circled in the dark, danger ever present. But in this penthouse, amid snow and silence, unexpected mercy had begun to heal what cruelty had broken. And the overwhelming love burning in my fractured heart promised it would only grow stronger. The days following the wedding settled into a fragile rhythm. Fragile because everything about Aaliyah's presence in my life felt like glass I was terrified to shatter. December 22, 2025 dawned clear and bitterly cold. I woke early on the sitting room sofa, muscles stiff, heart heavier than the night before. Through the connecting door, I could see her still asleep, curled tightly beneath the duvet as though even in dreams she expected the warmth to be taken away. The sight pierced me anew. This young woman, emaciated from years of hunger, cheeks still hollow despite the meals Mrs. Hahn pressed upon her, had finally found a safe place to rest, because I had forced her into it. The remorse was a living thing now, coiling tighter every hour, yet the passionate love that anchored my soul burned undimmed, demanding I give her more than mere safety. I wanted to give her strength, choices, a future she could shape herself. I summoned Mrs. Hahn before Aaliyah stirred. She needs structure, I said quietly in the kitchen. Lessons, training, things that will make her feel capable, not helpless. Mrs. Hahn, loyal for 20 years, nodded without question. She understood the weight behind my words. When Aaliyah appeared in the dining room for breakfast, wearing another borrowed sweater that swallowed her frame, feet bare on the heated floors, 3 things had been arranged on the table beside her plate: a beginner's Korean language workbook, a schedule for private online art classes. Her college dream had been art, Robert had let slip, and a note introducing Mr. Park, a retired Special Forces instructor who would begin self-defense training the following day. She stared at the items as though they were written in a foreign tongue. Her spoon paused halfway to her mouth. "Sir, what is all this?" "Opportunities," I answered, taking my seat across from her. "You will learn Korean so you can understand the world around you here. Art classes because I know you wanted to study it. And self-defense because no one, ever again, will make you feel powerless." Her eyes lifted to mine, wide with shock. Confusion flooded in next, then cautious curiosity. You're giving me lessons? Like school?" "Yes." I kept my voice steady, though inside the turmoil churned. Every gift felt like atonement for the cruelty that had brought her here. "Whatever you need, whatever you want to learn." Tears welled instantly. She set the spoon down, hands trembling. Dizziness struck. She pressed her fingers to her temples, breath shallow. "I don't understand," she whispered, voice soft and restrained. "You could just keep me here like a prisoner, but you're—" She could not finish. I rose and moved to her side, kneeling so our eyes were level. "You are not a prisoner, Aaliyah. You are my wife, and I want you strong." The word wife hung between us, heavy with everything unsaid. She searched my face, fear receding slightly, replaced by a fragile wonder that ruptured something deep in my chest. I wanted to pull her into my arms, to let the burning passion spill over, but I only rested a gentle hand on her shoulder until the dizziness passed. The first Korean lesson began that afternoon, in the sunlit library overlooking the park. The tutor, a patient young woman named Miss Lee, greeted Aaliyah with a warm smile. I lingered in the doorway, watching as Aaliyah sat stiffly at the table, workbook open, pencil gripped too tightly. She stumbled over the alphabet, Hangul's curves foreign to her tongue, but tried again and again, determination flickering beneath the exhaustion. When she correctly pronounced Annyeonghaseyo, Miss Lee clapped softly, and a shy, astonished smile broke across Aaliyah's face. It was the first genuine smile I had seen from her, small and fleeting, but it struck me like sunlight after years of night. My heart contracted violently, love and remorse colliding until I had to turn away, throat tight. That evening, after the lesson, she found me in the study. Snow had begun falling again, thick flakes drifting past the windows. She stood in the doorway, hesitant, hands clasped. "Sir, may I ask something?" "Of course." "Why Korean?" Her voice was timid, respectful. "You speak English perfectly." I set aside the reports I had been reading, more tension from Koreatown. "Because part of my world is Korean. The people around you, the conversations you will overhear, the culture that shaped me. I want you to understand it, to feel included, not excluded." Wonder deepened in her eyes, followed by a wave of emotion that brought fresh tears. "No one has ever—" She stopped, swallowing hard. "Back home, people always made me feel like I didn't belong anywhere. And now you're giving me a way to belong here." The confession, raw, painful, tore at me. I crossed to her, stopping close. "You belong here, Aaliyah, completely." She swayed, dizziness returning with the intensity of feeling. I caught her gently by the arms. For a moment she leaned into my support, head bowed, breathing unsteady. When she straightened, her voice was barely audible. "Thank you, sir." "Ji-hoon," I corrected softly. "When we are alone, call me Ji-hoon." Shock flickered again. She tested the name once, almost inaudibly, then nodded, cheeks warming. The next morning brought Mr. Park, compact, disciplined, in his late 50s. The gym in the lower level had been cleared for training. Aaliyah appeared in borrowed workout clothes that still hung loose, uncertainty in every step. Mr. Park greeted her with formal respect, bowing slightly. I watched from the observation deck above, heart pounding with conflicting emotions. Pride that I was giving her tools to protect herself, and anguish that she needed them because of the world I inhabited. The first session was basic, stance, balance, simple blocks. Aaliyah was clumsy at first, weakened by years of poor nutrition, but she listened intently, repeating movements until sweat beaded on her forehead. When she successfully executed a wrist escape, Mr. Park nodded approval, and she looked up toward me, eyes bright with cautious triumph. That look, small, hard-won victory in a life that had offered so few, sent the passionate love surging through me until I could barely breathe. Later that afternoon, trouble pulled me away again. Word came of another bold move. A Chinatown crew had muscled into one of my smaller gambling parlors, intimidating staff. I drove down myself, arriving as the confrontation unfolded in the back room. 5 of my men facing 7 intruders, voices raised, tension electric. I stepped in without a word. The room stilled. The rival leader, a young, ambitious lieutenant, met my gaze defiantly, but the defiance cracked under my silence. Negotiations were short, icy. They withdrew with muttered promises, but I knew the pressure was mounting. When I returned, snow thick on my coat, I found Aaliyah in the library practicing Hangul characters, pencil moving carefully across the page. She looked up as I entered, concern flickering. "Is everything okay, Ji-hoon?" The sound of my name on her lips, soft, tentative, stopped me in the doorway. "Yes," I said, "just business." She nodded, then hesitated. "I wrote something today. Miss Lee helped." She held out the workbook shyly. On the page, in careful characters, "Kamsahamnida, Ji-hoon." "Thank you." The simple phrase, written in her own hand, ruptured the last barrier I had clung to. Tears burned my eyes, unacceptable for a man like me, yet unstoppable. I knelt beside her chair, taking the book gently. "You learned this for me?" She nodded, cheeks flushing. "You're giving me so much, I wanted to give something back." In that quiet, emotionally condensed moment, tenderness overwhelmed every other feeling. I took her hand, thin fingers still cool, and pressed it between mine. "You give me more than you know, Aaliyah, every day." She searched my face, caution giving way to wonder, then to a fragile trust that felt like the most precious gift I had ever received. Outside, rivals plotted and snow fell. Inside, empowerment had quietly begun, not just lessons and training, but the slow, miraculous rebuilding of a spirit crushed by poverty and injustice. And in my fractured heart, the overwhelming love burned brighter, anchoring me to her with unbreakable force. 3 weeks had passed since the wedding, and January had settled over New York like a cold, unyielding hand. The days blurred into a pattern of lessons, training, and quiet evenings where Aaliyah's tentative confidence grew like the first green shoots after a long winter. Her Korean improved daily. Simple sentences now flowed with less hesitation. Her body strengthened under Mr. Park's instruction. The wrist escapes and strikes she practiced no longer left her breathless after only minutes. And in the art classes, her sketches, delicate, expressive lines on expensive paper, began to fill a portfolio that Mrs. Han proudly displayed on the library table. She was still thin, still carried the shadows of poverty in her eyes, but color had returned to her cheeks, and her smiles came more readily, small and shy, but real. I watched it all with a heart increasingly torn. Every step she took towards strength was my doing, and my atonement. The remorse had not lessened. If anything, it deepened with each glimpse of what her life could have been without my intervention. Yet the passionate love that had seized me from the beginning now anchored every decision. I lived for those moments when her gaze lingered on me with curiosity rather than fear, when she called me Ji-hoon in that soft, respectful voice and something warm flickered in her eyes. The annual charity gala for the Korean American Community Foundation was an event I could not avoid. Held in a grand ballroom on the Upper East Side, it drew the city's elite, business leaders, politicians, and those who moved in the shadows like me. It was the first time I would present Aaliyah publicly as my wife. The thought filled me with equal parts pride and dread. She was not ready for the scrutiny, the whispers, the judgment. But isolation would only feed her fear. I told her over dinner on January 15th. She listened quietly, fork paused above her plate, caution creeping back into her posture. "A party?" she asked, voice timid. "With a lot of people?" "Important people," I confirmed. "They will be curious about you. Some will be kind, others will not." She set the fork down, hands clasping in her lap. "I've never been to anything like that. What if I say something wrong? Or do something wrong?" "You will not," I said firmly. "You will be perfect because you are you. And I will be beside you the entire time." Doubt clouded her eyes, followed by a wave of dizziness. She pressed fingers to her temple, breath shallow. The pressure of expectation, added to the lingering fragility of her health, overwhelmed her. I moved to her side, steadying her with a hand on her back. "Breathe," I murmured. "We will prepare. Mrs. Han will help with the dress. You will practice greetings. You are stronger than you know." She leaned into my touch for a moment, seeking comfort instinctively, then straightened, nodding. "Okay, Ji-hoon, I'll try." The dress arrived 2 days later, emerald silk that complemented her dark skin, elegant but not ostentatious. When she emerged from the bedroom on the night of the gala, my breath caught. She looked beautiful, ethereal, the fabric draping gracefully over her still slender frame. But her hands trembled as she smoothed the skirt, eyes wide with fear. "You are stunning," I said quietly. She managed a small, nervous smile. "Thank you. I feel like I'm playing dress-up." "You are not," I replied, offering my arm. "You are my wife." The ballroom was a sea of tuxedos and gowns, crystal chandeliers casting golden light over tables laden with exquisite food. Heads turned as we entered. Whispers followed, some admiring, many speculative. "So young. Where did he find her? American, isn't she?" Aaliyah's grip tightened on my arm, her steps hesitant. I covered her hand with mine, a silent promise of protection. We moved through the crowd, greetings exchanged in Korean and English. She responded when spoken to, voice soft and respectful, her practiced phrases flawless. Pride swelled in me, mingled with fierce protectiveness. Then came Victor Chen, a rival from Chinatown, mid-50s, handsome in a polished way, with a reputation for cruelty masked as charm. He approached with a glass of champagne, eyes raking over Aaliyah in a way that made my blood turn to ice. "Kang," he greeted me coolly, "your new bride is exquisite." He turned to her, smile predatory. "Tell me, dear, what does a girl like you see in a man old enough to be your grandfather?" The insult landed like a slap. Aaliyah stiffened beside me, color draining from her face. The room's attention sharpened, conversations quieting, eyes turning. She swayed slightly, dizziness striking under the weight of humiliation and scrutiny. I felt rage rise, hot and immediate, but before I could speak, Aaliyah drew a steadying breath and met Chen's gaze directly. Her voice, when it came, was soft but clear, laced with a steel I had only glimpsed in training. "I see a man who keeps his promises," she said, "a man who protects what is his. Perhaps you should try it sometime." Silence rippled outward. Chen's smile froze, eyes flashing with fury. Then, to my astonishment and pride that nearly overwhelmed me, I laughed, a genuine deep sound that cut through the tension. "My wife," I said, voice carrying, "is more than capable of speaking for herself. Remember that, Chen." We moved away, Aaliyah trembling now with reaction. I guided her to a quieter corner, hands steady on her back. "That was dangerous," I said quietly, "but magnificent." She looked up at me, eyes wide with shock at her own boldness. "I don't know where that came from. I couldn't let him talk to you like that." The words, the fierce loyalty directed at me, ruptured the last remnants of distance between us. I cupped her face gently, thumb brushing her cheek. "You defended me," I murmured. "Do you know what that means to me?" Confusion flickered, then something deeper, recognition of the bond forming despite our beginning. Tears welled. "Ji-hoon." Before more could be said, my phone vibrated urgently. Trouble in Koreatown, Chen's allies making a move while I was distracted. I excused myself briefly, rage now fully ignited. The confrontation unfolded on a side street near one of my clubs, 8 men blocking my enforcers, threats escalating. I arrived as words turned heated. Chen's lieutenant stood at the center, smirking. "Enjoying the party, Kang? Your little bride keeping you busy?" I stepped forward, presence alone silencing the group. "You test me tonight of all nights," I said coldly. "Leave, now." Negotiations were terse, danger thick in the air. They backed down, but not without promises of future reckoning. When I returned to the ballroom, Aaliyah waited anxiously. The moment she saw me, relief flooded her face. "Are you okay?" "I am now," I said, offering my arm again. Later, in the car riding home through snow-dusted streets, she leaned against my shoulder, exhausted, but no longer trembling with fear. "I was scared," she admitted softly. "But I felt strong, because of you." The confession, quiet and sincere, sent the passionate love surging through me until I could barely speak. I pressed a kiss to her temple, the first voluntary touch I had allowed myself. "You were always strong, Aaliyah. I only helped you remember." Back in the penthouse, she stood at the windows watching snow fall over the park, dress shimmering in the low light. I approached from behind, hands resting lightly on her shoulders. "Thank you," she whispered, "for believing I could do that." I turned her gently to face me. "Thank you for defending me, for trusting me enough to stand at my side." Her eyes searched mine, caution giving way to something warmer, deeper. The emotional rupture was mutual, tears in her eyes mirroring the ones I fought back. In that quiet, condensed moment of tenderness, the public fire she had shown became the spark that ignited something irreversible between us. Outside, rivals schemed. Inside, a bond forged in cruelty and mercy grew stronger, anchored by a love that consumed me entirely. The weeks after the gala carried a new charge in the air, like the hush before a storm breaks. January deepened into February, and the city remained locked in winter's grip, snow piling against the penthouse windows, wind howling through the canyons of Manhattan. Aaliyah's progress continued. Her Korean now allowed her to follow conversations between Mrs. Han and the staff. Her self-defense sessions left her flushed and breathing hard, but standing taller, and her art portfolio grew thick with drawings that revealed a soul far older than 19 years. She had begun to fill out slightly, the sharp edges of hunger softening, yet the shadows of her past still lingered in quiet moments, eyes distant, fingers tracing the diamond ring as if reminding herself it was real. I watched her transformation with a heart increasingly consumed. The remorse that had gnawed at me from the beginning now felt like a constant ache. Every smile she gave me was a reminder of the cruelty that had placed her here. Yet the passionate love anchoring my soul burned fiercer than ever, demanding expression I still held in check. I slept on the sitting room sofa every night, waking to the sound of her moving about the bedroom, and each morning the restraint cost me more. I was a man who commanded empires, yet in her presence I was reduced to careful distance, terrified of frightening the trust she had only just begun to offer. Evenings became our quiet ritual. After dinner, we would sit in the study with cups of ginseng tea, steaming, fragrant, a taste of my heritage I had introduced gently. She had learned to prepare it herself, hands steady now as she measured roots and honey. We spoke of small things at first, her day's lessons, a sketch she was proud of, the snow falling over Central Park. Gradually, the conversations deepened. I told her fragments of my parents' story, how they had arrived in New York with 2 suitcases and unbreakable will, how they had worked 16-hour days to give me a future. She listened, eyes wide with cautious empathy, and in return shared pieces of her own past. The apartment with broken windows taped over cardboard, nights she had gone to bed hungry so younger cousins could eat, the cruel injustice of watching dreams slip away because a single medical bill had swallowed everything. One evening in late February, snow tapping insistently against the windows, she asked about the ancestral altar in the hallway, the Jesa table with its framed photographs and offering bowl. "Who are they?" she asked softly, voice respectful. "My parents," I answered. "They passed years ago. This keeps their memory close." She studied the photos, then turned to me. "Do you miss them?" "Every day," I said, the admission surprising me with its rawness. She nodded, understanding flickering in her eyes. "I miss my mom sometimes, even though I never really knew her. She left when I was little. Dad said she couldn't handle it, the bills, the fighting, everything." Her voice trembled slightly. "I used to think it was my fault." The confession struck deep. I set my tea aside and moved closer on the sofa. "It was never your fault, Aaliyah. None of it. The poverty, the loss, the pain. You were a child." Tears welled. She blinked them back, but one escaped. Without thinking, I reached out and brushed it away, my thumb lingering against her cheek. She did not pull back. Instead, she leaned into the touch, eyes closing briefly as though savoring warmth she had long been denied. The contact ignited something electric between us. My hand remained, cupping her face gently. Her breathing quickened, mine matched it. The passionate love I had restrained for weeks surged forward, overwhelming and undeniable. "Aaliyah," I murmured, voice rough with emotion. Her eyes opened, meeting mine, fear and curiosity warring, but curiosity winning. Slowly, giving her every chance to refuse, I leaned in. Our lips met, soft at first, tentative, then deepening as hunger broke through years of restraint on my part and a lifetime of deprivation on hers. She kissed me back with a desperation that mirrored my own, hands rising to grip my shoulders as though anchoring herself against a storm. The world narrowed to the taste of her, the warmth, the soft sound she made when my arms finally wrapped around her, pulling her close. Years of loneliness, of calculated distance, shattered in that moment. The kiss was fire, claiming, healing, igniting. But then, reality intruded. She pulled away suddenly, breathing hard, eyes wide with shock and confusion. Tears spilled freely now. She stood on shaking legs, backing toward the door. "I can't," she whispered, voice breaking. You forced this. You bought me. I can't want you." The words struck like a blade. Remorse crashed over me, violent and numbing. I rose, but did not follow. "Aaliyah." "I'm sorry," she gasped, dizziness overtaking her. She pressed a hand to the wall for balance, face paling. I need space." She fled to the bedroom, door closing softly behind her. I stood frozen, heart torn asunder. The passionate love burned hotter than ever, but now mingled with fresh guilt. I had pushed too far, too soon. She was right. Our beginning had been coercion, cruelty. How could desire bloom from that soil? I did not follow. Instead, I poured bourbon with shaking hands and stood at the window, snow swirling in the dark. My phone buzzed, urgent reports from Koreatown. The combined pressure from Russians in Chinatown had escalated, a direct challenge. One of my key lieutenants had been cornered outside a restaurant, threats delivered in person. I left immediately, the cold night air a match for the turmoil inside me. The confrontation unfolded on a dimly lit street. 9 rivals surrounding 3 of my men, tension crackling. I stepped from the shadows, presence shifting the balance instantly. "This ends tonight," I said coldly. Words were exchanged, sharp, veiled threats. No violence erupted. My reputation held them in check. But the message was clear. They sensed vulnerability in my sudden marriage, in the whispers of a young wife. They would exploit it. When I returned hours later, the penthouse was silent. I paused outside the bedroom door, listening. No sound. I entered the sitting room and lay on the sofa, fully clothed, staring into darkness. The emotional rupture consumed me, love and remorse colliding until tears, silent and shameful, wet my temples. She had kissed me back. That truth anchored me even through the pain. The fire had ignited, passionate and mutual. And though she had fled in confusion and rightful anger, I knew, deep in my fractured heart, that the bond between us had shifted irrevocably. Outside, snow continued to fall, muffling the city's dangers. Inside, in the quiet aftermath of that kiss, passion had been ignited, and nothing would ever be the same. The days following the kiss were a delicate dance of distance and unspoken longing. Aaliyah avoided the study in the evenings, taking her ginseng tea alone in the library or retreating early to the bedroom. She continued her lessons and training with quiet determination, but when our paths crossed, her eyes would flicker to mine, confused, cautious, laced with something that looked like fear of her own feelings. She spoke politely, respectfully, voice soft as always, but the warmth that had begun to bloom was now guarded behind walls I recognized all too well. I had built similar ones my entire life. I did not press her. The remorse that had become my constant companion deepened into something almost unbearable. That kiss, initiated by me, returned by her, had crossed a line I had sworn not to cross until she was ready. The passionate love burning in my chest demanded everything, yet guilt demanded I give her space. I slept on the sofa still, waking to the faint sounds of her moving about the bedroom, heart aching with every creak of the floorboards. I was a man who commanded fear and respect in the darkest corners of the city, yet in my own home, I was reduced to silent vigil, torn between desire and self-loathing. March arrived with a brief thaw, only to be followed by a late storm that blanketed the city in heavy snow once more. On the night of March 10th, 2025, I was pulled away again. Reports came in waves. The combined pressure from the Russians and Chinatown had reached a breaking point. A direct assault on one of my warehouses near the Hudson, goods diverted, men roughed up. I left the penthouse with a storm in my chest to match the one outside. The confrontation unfolded in the deserted lot by the river. 12 rivals facing 8 of my men, tension thick under floodlights. Snow swirled around us as I stepped from the car. The leader, a scarred Russian named Ivan, smirked through the flakes. "Your pretty new wife making you soft, Kang?" The insult to Aaliyah ignited rage I barely contained. We spoke in low voices, threats, counter-threats, boundaries redrawn. No blows landed. My presence and the promise in my eyes were enough. They retreated, but the message lingered. They would strike where I was vulnerable. I returned home near midnight, snow melting from my coat in the private elevator. The penthouse was dark except for a faint light from the master bedroom. I paused in the hallway, listening. Silence. I entered the sitting room quietly, intending to change and settle on the sofa as always. Then I heard it, a muffled crash from downstairs, followed by shouts in Korean. My blood turned to ice. The alarms had not triggered. This was an inside breach. I moved without thinking, grabbing the pistol from the hidden safe and racing down the private stairs. The lower levels erupted in chaos, masked intruders, at least 10, moving with military precision. My security team engaged in the corridors, but they were outnumbered. Gunfire cracked, sharp, controlled bursts. I reached the main hallway as 2 intruders broke toward the elevator. Mrs. Han's scream echoed from the kitchen. Aaliyah. I ran, heart pounding with terror I had never known. The rivals had come for her, to hurt me where it would wound deepest. I burst into the gym where Mr. Park trained her. Aaliyah stood in the center, backed against the mirrors, one intruder advancing with a knife. Mrs. Han lay on the floor, clutching a bleeding arm. Aaliyah's training kicked in. She sidestepped, striking hard at the man's throat as Mr. Park had taught her, then driving her knee into his groin. He staggered, and she grabbed a nearby dumbbell, swinging with all her strength. The blow connected. He dropped. More came. She fought fiercely, blocks, strikes, evasion, but she was outnumbered, exhaustion setting in fast. One grabbed her arm, twisting. She cried out in pain. I arrived then, pistol raised. Let her go. The room stilled. My men poured in behind me. The intruders hesitated, then fled through the breach they had created. We secured the penthouse. Medics called for Mrs. Han. Aaliyah stood shaking in the center of the gym, dumbbell still clutched in white-knuckled hands, face pale with shock. When she saw me, the weapon fell with a clang. She swayed, dizziness overwhelming her, adrenaline crash, fear, pain from the twisted arm. I crossed the room in strides, pulling her into my arms. She collapsed against me, trembling violently, face buried in my chest. "Ji-hoon," she whispered, voice breaking. They came for me." "You're safe," I said fiercely, holding her tighter than I ever had. "You fought them off. You protected Mrs. Han. You were magnificent." She clung to me, tears soaking my shirt. The passionate love surged, mingled now with raw fear for her life. The remorse was unbearable. I had brought this danger to her door. Mrs. Han was tended to, wounds superficial, and taken to rest. Security swept the building, breach sealed. I carried Aaliyah upstairs to the bedroom, her body light and shaking in my arms. She did not protest. I laid her on the bed gently, checking for injuries. Her arm was bruised, nothing broken. She watched me with wide eyes, shock giving way to something deeper. "They wanted to hurt you through me," she said quietly. Yes, the admission tore at me. She reached up suddenly, fingers touching my face. I was so scared, but I fought because of what you taught me. Pride and love crashed together. I caught her hand, pressing it to my cheek. You were brave beyond words. The emotional rupture came then, tears spilling from her eyes, from mine. She pulled me down, lips finding mine in a kiss born of survival and need. It was different from before, desperate, healing, passionate. Walls crumbled completely. Clothes fell away slowly, reverently. I worshipped her with hands and mouth, every scar from cold nights, every mark of hunger, kissing away the past. She responded with growing trust, hands exploring, breath coming in soft gasps. When we came together, it was tender and intense, overwhelming. She cried out, not from pain, but from the depth of connection, of finally feeling cherished after a lifetime of deprivation. Afterward, I held her close, her head on my chest, fingers tracing patterns on my skin. She fell asleep quickly, exhaustion claiming her at last. I lay awake, the passionate love now fulfilled, yet deeper than ever. The attack had nearly taken her from me. The thought brought fresh terror and resolve. I would end the threats, dismantle whatever necessary to keep her safe. Outside, snow continued to fall. Inside, in the quiet aftermath of violence and surrender, our bond had been forged unbreakable. I held her through the night, her body curled against mine in the vast bed that had once felt like a symbol of my isolation. March 11th, 2025, dawned gray and quiet, the snow from the previous storm still clinging to the windows. Aaliyah slept deeply for the first time since the attack, her breathing steady, face relaxed in a way I had rarely seen. Bruises bloomed faint purple on her arm where the intruder had twisted it, a stark reminder of how close I had come to losing her. Mrs. Hahn's wound had been treated. She rested in her quarters under a nurse's care. Security had been tripled, new protocols, new men, but no measure felt enough. The passionate love that had anchored my heart from the beginning now consumed me entirely. The attack had stripped away the last pretense of restraint. When she had fought back, fierce, untrained but unyielding, and then collapsed into my arms, something irrevocable had shattered inside both of us. The kiss that followed, the surrender that came after, had been born of terror and relief, of walls finally crumbling under the weight of everything we had both endured. Yet, even in the quiet aftermath, remorse gnawed deeper. I had brought this violence to her door. My world had nearly destroyed the one person who had begun to heal my fractured soul. She stirred near noon, eyes fluttering open to find me watching her. For a moment, confusion flickered, disorientation from the unfamiliar closeness, then memory returned. Color rose in her cheeks. She did not pull away. "Ji-hoon," she whispered, voice soft and uncertain. "Last night," I brushed the strand of hair from her face, touch gentle. "Last night you were magnificent. You saved yourself, and then you let me hold you." Tears welled instantly. She turned her face into my palm, breath catching. "I was so scared. I thought they would—" She could not finish. Dizziness struck as emotion surged. She gripped my shirt to steady herself. "You are safe," I said fiercely. "They will never touch you again." She searched my eyes, caution giving way to raw vulnerability. "You came for me. You always come for me." The words ruptured me. I pulled her closer, lips finding hers in a kiss that began tender and deepened into the same passionate fire of the night before. She responded without hesitation now, hands sliding up my back, body pressing against mine as though seeking proof that this, safety, affection, desire, was real after a lifetime of deprivation. We came together again in the pale daylight, slower this time, reverent. I traced every curve that hunger had once sharpened, every inch of skin that cold winds had chapped, whispering promises against her warmth. She gave herself fully, tears slipping down her temples, not from pain, but from the overwhelming intensity of being cherished. When release came, she clung to me, soft cries muffled against my shoulder, body trembling with aftershocks of emotion as much as pleasure. Afterward, we lay tangled in the sheets, her head on my chest, my fingers stroking her hair. The quiet was profound, emotionally condensed, a moment of pure tenderness amid the chaos our lives had become. "I never thought anyone would want me like this," she said eventually, voice small. "Not after everything. The hunger, the cold, the shame of it all." The confession tore at me. I tightened my arms around her. "You are everything, Aaliyah, everything I never knew I needed." She lifted her head, eyes shining. "You make me feel—" Worthy. For the first time, the words were a gift and a condemnation. Remorse surged again. How had the world failed her so completely that my love was the first to make her feel worthy? Yet the passionate attachment burned brighter, anchoring me to her with unbreakable force. That afternoon brought new reports. The attack had been a coordinated strike, remnants of the Russian crew allied with Chinatown holdouts. They had exploited a brief security lapse during a shift change. I met with my lieutenants in the study, rage carefully leashed. Plans were made, pressure applied, alliances severed. I would end this threat permanently. While I worked, Aaliyah rested, then joined Mrs. Han in the kitchen, insisting on helping prepare dinner despite protests. When I found them later, Aaliyah was stirring a pot of kimchi jjigae, sleeves rolled up, face flushed from the steam. Mrs. Han watched her with fond approval. The domestic scene, my wife cooking in our home, struck me with unexpected force. This was what I had craved without knowing. Normalcy, partnership, love. That evening, over dinner, she was quieter than usual. I sensed the weight of lingering shock. When we retired to the bedroom, together now, no more sofa, she hesitated at the threshold. "Ji-hoon, do you regret it? Last night? And today?" I turned to her, taking her hands. "Never. I have wanted you since the moment I saw you, but I regret the pain that brought us here, the fear you felt." She stepped closer, voice trembling. "I was afraid of wanting you, because of how it started. But now, I don't want to be afraid anymore." We kissed again, slower, deeper. The intimacy that followed was different, exploratory, trusting, passionate in its gentleness. She traced the scars on my back from old confrontations, whispering questions I answered honestly. I learned the stories behind the faint stretch marks on her hips from growth spurts during hungry years, kissing each one with reverence. In the quiet aftermath, she fell asleep in my arms. I lay awake, the passionate love now intertwined with fierce protectiveness. The attack had shown me how fragile this happiness was. Rivals still circled, one final confrontation loomed. 2 nights later, it came. Intelligence pinpointed the remaining instigators gathering in a Koreatown warehouse. I went myself, unwilling to risk escalation without my presence. The scene unfolded under harsh fluorescent lights, 10 holdouts facing 12 of my men, weapons holstered but hands ready. The leader stepped forward, defiant. "This ends with blood, Kang, unless you step back." I met his gaze coldly. "It ends tonight, but not with blood. You leave my territory, permanently." Negotiations were tense, voices low, danger thick. My reputation and the quiet promise of consequences held them. They dispersed, exiled, operations dismantled. The threat was neutralized. When I returned near dawn, Aaliyah waited in the bedroom, wrapped in a robe, eyes anxious. The moment she saw me unharmed, relief flooded her face. She ran to me, arms wrapping around my neck. "I was so scared," she whispered. "I promised you safety," I said, holding her close. "And I keep my promises." We stood like that for a long while, snow beginning to fall again outside. In that quiet, emotionally condensed embrace, the breakthrough felt complete. Suspicion and fear had given way to trust, to passionate love returned in full. Our beginning had been rooted in cruelty and desperate circumstance. But here, in the warmth of each other's arms, intimacy had broken through, tender, fierce, redemptive. April brought the first true hints of spring to New York, pale sunlight filtering through the budding trees of Central Park, the relentless wind softening into something gentler. The penthouse, once a fortress of isolation, had become a home in the fullest sense. Aaliyah moved through it with growing confidence, preparing ginseng tea in the mornings, practicing Korean phrases with Mrs. Han, filling sketchbooks with drawings that captured the city's awakening. Her body had filled out noticeably, curves softened, strength visible in the way she carried herself after months of training and nourishment. The bruises from the attack had faded, but the memory lingered in both of us, a silent bond forged in violence and survival. Our nights were no longer spent apart. She slept in my arms, head on my chest, fingers often tracing idle patterns on my skin, as though reassuring herself I was real. The passionate intimacy that had broken through after the attack deepened with every passing day, tender in quiet moments, fierce when emotion overtook us. I lived for the way she whispered my name in the dark, voice no longer timid but warm with trust and desire. Yet the remorse never left me. Every touch reminded me of the cruelty that had brought her here, every smile a gift I felt I did not deserve. One afternoon in late April, I returned from a meeting to find her in the library, surrounded by old files Mrs. Hahn had retrieved at my quiet request. I had asked for anything that might connect to Aaliyah's past, birth records, whatever scraps remained from the life her father had nearly destroyed. I had intended to give them to her gently when she was ready, but curiosity, that cautious spark I had nurtured from the beginning, had led her to them early. She sat on the floor amid open folders, face pale, eyes wide with shock. In her hands, she held a faded hospital bracelet and a single photograph, a young woman, clearly African-American, but with distinct East Asian features, holding a newborn. The woman's eyes were Aaliyah's eyes. "Jihoon," she whispered as I entered, voice trembling. "What is this?" I knelt beside her, heart contracting at the confusion and pain on her face. "Documents I had retrieved, about your birth." She handed me a letter, yellowed, creased from years of storage. It was from a woman named Soo-Jin Park, written in careful English to the adoption agency. The words were heartbreaking. A young Korean immigrant, alone in America, pregnant after a brief relationship, unable to provide for a child. She had chosen adoption, hoping for a better life for her daughter. Aaliyah's mother had been Korean. The revelation struck her like a physical blow. She swayed, dizziness overtaking her, breath shallow, hands pressing to her temples. "I'm part Korean?" Her voice broke. "All this time, I thought..." Tears spilled. "Dad never told me. He said Mom left because she didn't want us. But she gave me up because she couldn't." I pulled her into my arms as sobs racked her thin frame. The emotional rupture was profound. Shock, grief, a sudden unraveling of identity. She had grown up feeling she belonged nowhere, too black for some spaces, not enough for others, crushed by poverty that offered no room for questions about heritage. Now this truth, her mother's sacrifice, the Korean blood running through her veins, overwhelmed her completely. "I don't know who I am anymore," she whispered against my chest. "You are Aaliyah Kang," I said fiercely. "You are the woman who survived unimaginable hardship, who learned a new language, fought off attackers, creates beauty with her hands. Your heritage is part of you, but it does not define you alone. You are you, strong, resilient, loved beyond measure." She clung to me, tears soaking my shirt. The passionate love surged, protective and tender. I held her through the storm, whispering reassurances in Korean and English until exhaustion claimed her. That evening, over quiet dinner, she was subdued, eyes distant. "I keep thinking about her," she said softly. "Soo-Jin. Wondering what her life was like, if she ever thought about me." I reached across the table, taking her hand. "We can find out if you want. I have resources." Hope flickered, cautious as always. "Really?" "Anything," I promised. The search began discreetly. Within days, records surfaced. Soo-Jin Park had returned to Seoul after the adoption, married, had another child. But tragedy had followed. Cancer, years of treatment, now in remission but financially ruined. She lived quietly, alone since her husband's death. When I told Aaliyah, her face crumpled again. "She's been sick all this time?" I nodded. "I have already arranged for the best care in Seoul, anonymously for now, bills paid, treatments covered." Shock widened her eyes. You did that? For a woman you've never met?" "For you," I said simply. "Because she gave me you." Tears spilled anew. She rose and came to me, straddling my lap, arms wrapping around my neck. The kiss that followed was deep, grateful, passionate. We made love slowly on the study sofa, her tears mingling with whispers of thanks, my hands worshiping her as though she were the most precious thing in my world, which she was. Later, in bed, she lay with her head on my chest. "I used to hate mirrors," she confessed quietly, "because I never felt like I fit. Now, I see her in my eyes, and I see you looking at me like I'm enough." "You are more than enough," I murmured, voice rough with emotion. The heritage shock had torn open old wounds, the irrational injustice of a mother forced to give up her child, the cruel misfortune of poverty that had hidden truth from both. Yet in its wake, healing began. Aaliyah practiced more Korean phrases, asked Mrs. Han about traditions, even attempted to cook bulgogi with guidance. The connection to my world deepened her sense of belonging. Outside, the city thawed. Rivals remained quiet after my decisive actions. Inside, in quiet moments of tenderness, her sketching while I worked, our evenings with ginseng tea and shared stories, the passionate love grew roots. One night in May, she woke me with gentle kisses. "Ji-hoon," she whispered, "I want to write to her, my mother. Will you help?" "Of course." We composed the letter together, careful, heartfelt words revealing her identity, expressing gratitude and love. It was sent anonymously at first, with an invitation to connect if she wished. The response came weeks later, a letter in careful English, tears staining the page. Soo-jin wrote of her regret, her constant thoughts of the daughter she had lost, her joy at knowing Aaliyah had found happiness. Aaliyah read it aloud, voice breaking, then collapsed into my arms, sobbing, not from pain, but from healing. I held her through it, the passionate love anchoring us both. The heritage shock had been profound, disorienting, painful, but in its aftermath, identity reformed, stronger, richer, embraced. And in my arms, the woman I loved more than life itself found the belonging she had always been denied. Summer settled over New York with a humid warmth that made the city pulse with life. June's long days filled the penthouse with golden light, reflecting off the glass walls and illuminating the changes that had taken root in our lives. Aaliyah's sketches now adorned the walls, vibrant scenes of Central Park in bloom, portraits of Mrs. Han smiling over a pot of kimchi, even one of me, captured in quiet contemplation at the ancestral altar. Her Korean had become fluent enough for full conversations. She laughed with the staff, helped prepare traditional meals, and had begun researching Korean art history for her online classes. The heritage revelation had not erased the pain of her past, but it had woven her more tightly into my world, giving her a sense of belonging she had never known. Our intimacy had deepened into something profound. Passionate nights blending tenderness and fire, mornings waking tangled in sheets, her hand often resting on my chest as though anchoring herself to this new reality. The love that had ignited in darkness now flourished in light. Yet my inner turmoil had not quieted. Remorse for the forced beginning lingered like a shadow. Every act of kindness I offered felt like insufficient repayment for the cruelty I had inflicted. The passionate attachment burned undimmed, but now carried the weight of responsibility. I would protect this happiness at any cost. In early July, Aaliyah began to change subtly. Mornings brought nausea she tried to hide, exhaustion that sent her napping in the library amid her books. At first, she dismissed it as stress or a summer bug. But when her cycle did not come for the second month, Mrs. Han noticed, pressing a pregnancy test into her hands with a knowing smile. She took it alone in the bathroom, emerging pale and trembling, the positive result clutched in her fingers. I found her in the bedroom, sitting on the edge of the bed, eyes wide with shock. Dizziness struck as the reality sank in. She swayed, breath catching, tears spilling before words could form. "Ji-hoon," she whispered, voice soft and breaking. I'm pregnant." The words hit me like a thunderbolt. Joy surged first, overwhelming, fierce. The heir I had once demanded now conceived in love. But remorse followed instantly, violent and tearing. This child, wanted beyond measure, had its origins in coercion. How could I celebrate when the foundation was so flawed? I knelt before her, taking her hands. "A child," I said, voice rough. "Our child." She searched my face, confusion and fear mingling with tentative joy. "Are you happy? Truly?" More than I have words for, I answered honestly. But I know this was part of why you came here.
She silenced me with fingers to my lips. That was then. This is us now. I want this baby, with you. Tears fell freely from both of us. I pulled her into my arms, holding her as sobs of relief and lingering pain shook her. The emotional rupture was sharp, joy colliding with old wounds. She had grown up believing she would never have security, let alone a family built on love. Now, carrying our child, the weight of that past crashed against the promise of future. Mrs. Hahn arranged the best obstetrician immediately. Private visits, every test, every comfort. I became almost obsessive, adjusting her diet, limiting her training sessions, insisting on rest. She laughed at my protectiveness at first, then grew quiet, eyes shining with wonder at being cared for so completely. The hidden kindness I had extended to Soo Jin came to light one evening in August.
Aaliyah had been corresponding with her mother. Letters at first, then video calls. Tentative steps toward reconciliation. Soo Jin mentioned in passing how her medical bills had mysteriously vanished years ago, treatments covered by an anonymous donor. Aaliyah turned to me during one call, eyes widening. "Ji-hoon, it was you. All this time." I nodded, throat tight. From the moment I learned of her existence, for you. Shock gave way to tears. She ended the call and crossed to me, straddling my lap, arms around my neck. "You gave her back to me before I even knew I needed her." The kiss that followed was deep, grateful, passionate. We made love slowly, reverently, my hands splaying over her still flat stomach, whispering promises to the life growing there. She cried through it, overwhelmed by the depth of care after a lifetime of absence. As her pregnancy progressed, visible now in the gentle curve beneath her clothes, I began dismantling the dangerous parts of my empire. Meetings with lieutenants became announcements, underground operations liquidated, legitimate businesses expanded. When questioned, I was simple. I want my child to know a father, not a legend built on shadows. The final confrontation came in September, a holdout faction refusing to dissolve. The meeting unfolded in a Koreatown restaurant backroom, 8 men facing my 6, tension thick. Threats were veiled, postures aggressive. "You go legitimate, you leave us exposed," one growled. I met his gaze coldly. "You adapt or you disappear. My family comes first." My presence and the quiet promise of consequences ended it. They dispersed, operations absorbed or shut down. The empire shifted, cleaner, safer. Aaliyah noticed the change. "You're stepping back," she said one night, hand on her belly as we watched the city lights. "For our child," I confirmed. "For us." She turned to me, eyes shining. "You're becoming the man you always could have been." The words healed something deep. In quiet moments, her head on my shoulder, my hand over the faint kicks beneath her skin, tenderness overwhelmed every shadow. Robert reached out once, hearing of the pregnancy through old channels. Aaliyah met him in a neutral cafe, guarded but composed. The confrontation was painful. She laid bare the hurt of being sold, the years of suffering his choices caused. He wept, begging forgiveness. She did not grant it fully, but allowed him the role of grandfather if he earned it. Watching from afar, pride swelled. She had taken back power. By October, with autumn painting the park in gold, our family felt real. The passionate love that began in darkness had transformed us both. Remorse lingered, but hope now outweighed it. One evening, as we stood at the window watching leaves fall, Aaliyah leaned into me. "I was so broken when you found me," she whispered. "Hungry, cold, hopeless. You gave me everything." I turned her to face me, hands framing her face. "You gave me everything, Aaliyah. Purpose, love, a future." We kissed, slow and deep, the child between us a living promise. The pregnancy had brought hidden kindness to light, old wounds to healing, and a family forged from the unlikeliest beginning. Outside, the city moved on. Inside, in the warmth we had built, love had redeemed what cruelty began. October's chill returned to New York, leaves turning brilliant red and gold in Central Park before drifting to the ground in quiet surrender. Aaliyah's pregnancy had advanced into the 7th month, her belly rounded beautifully beneath flowing dresses, the child within active and strong, kicking often as if eager to join the world. She glowed with a radiance that stole my breath daily, skin luminous, eyes bright with anticipation, and the deep contentment of finally feeling safe, cherished, whole. We spent evenings with her feet in my lap as I massaged them gently, her hand guiding mine to feel the baby's movements. She had begun preparing a nursery, soft neutrals with touches of Korean and African patterns woven together, a celebration of the dual heritage our child would carry. The passionate love between us had reached a depth I had never imagined possible. Nights were filled with tender intimacy, her body nestled against mine, whispers of dreams for our family. Yet my inner turmoil had not quieted. Remorse for our beginning lingered, sharpened now by the knowledge that this child, conceived in love, yes, but rooted in coercion, would one day learn the truth. The empire I had begun dismantling felt like insufficient penance. I poured everything into legitimacy, real estate expansions, charitable foundations in Koreatown and Harlem, scholarships for children who had known the same hunger Aaliyah once endured. But guilt gnawed relentlessly, a violent undercurrent beneath the joy. Robert Thompson re-entered our lives in early October. He had kept his distance after their painful meeting, but news of the pregnancy drew him like a moth to flame. He called, voice trembling with desperate hope, begging to see his daughter. Aaliyah hesitated, old wounds raw, but the approaching birth softened her. "He's the only family I had for so long," she said quietly one evening, hand on her belly. "Maybe he can change." I agreed reluctantly, arranging a supervised visit at a neutral restaurant. I watched from afar as they spoke, her guarded but composed, him tearful and pleading. She did not forgive fully, but allowed tentative contact. "For the baby," she told me later, "a chance at grandfather." I should have seen the signs. Greed and guilt are a dangerous mix in a broken man. On October 15, 2025, the betrayal came. Aaliyah had gone for a short walk in the park, accompanied by 2 guards as always. The day was crisp, leaves crunching underfoot. I was in a meeting downtown when the call came. Ambush, a van, masked men, quick and professional. The guards overpowered, non-lethal but effective. Aaliyah taken. The world narrowed to a single point of terror. I left the meeting without a word, racing back in the car, heart pounding with a fear I had never known. Not for myself, for her, for our unborn child. The passionate love that had sustained me now turned to rage and panic. Remorse crashed violently. This was my past catching up, my enemies using the one vulnerability I had. Reports flooded in. The kidnapping traced to a desperate faction, holdouts from the old alliances, bought by Robert's promise of inside information for a payout. He had sold her out again, consumed by debt and resentment, believing he could force a ransom and disappear. I mobilized everything. Trackers located the warehouse in Brooklyn where they held her, abandoned, remote. I went myself, unwilling to risk delay. The rescue unfolded in tense minutes. My men surrounding the building, me entering first, 8 kidnappers, armed but nervous. Robert among them, face pale with regret too late. The confrontation was icy. "You sold your own daughter," I said, voice low and lethal. He crumbled. "I had no choice. They threatened me." "You always have a choice." I stepped closer. "Release her, now." They hesitated, weapons raised but uncertain. My presence, my reputation, held them. Negotiations were short, promises of consequences if they harmed her. They backed down, opening the door to the back room. Aaliyah sat tied to a chair, face bruised, lips split, but alive. Terror in her eyes turned to relief when she saw me. She was shaking, breath ragged, one hand protectively over her belly. "Ji-hoon," she gasped. I crossed to her in seconds, cutting the ropes, pulling her into my arms. She clung to me, sobbing. In the chaos, one kidnapper lunged, knife flashing. I turned, taking the blade in my side to shield her. Pain exploded, hot and sharp, but I stayed upright, disarming him with a strike Mr. Park would have approved. My men swarmed in. The kidnappers were subdued, Robert among them, weeping, begging. I left him to them, focus only on Aaliyah. Blood soaked my shirt, but I carried her out, refusing aid until she was safe in the car. Medics waited, private, discreet. The wound was deep but not fatal. Stitches and time would heal it. In the hospital, our private suite, she held my hand as doctors worked, tears streaming. "You're hurt because of me." "No," I said fiercely, "because of my past, but I would take 1,000 wounds to keep you safe." Shock and pain mingled on her face, dizziness from trauma and pregnancy hormones, numbness settling in. She whispered apologies, guilt for trusting her father crushing her anew. The betrayal was shocking, chaotic. Robert's greed destroying the fragile bridge she had built. He was dealt with quietly, debts called in, exile enforced. No more chances. Recovery was slow. I healed beside her, refusing to leave the hospital until she did. Nights were spent holding her as nightmares came, memories of cold apartments blending with the warehouse terror. I whispered promises in Korean and English, hand on her belly, feeling our child kick defiantly. In quiet moments, sunlight through the window, her head on my shoulder, the tenderness was profound. "You risked everything for me," she said once, voice soft. "You are everything," I replied. The emotional rupture healed slowly, betrayal's pain giving way to deeper trust. She had been crushed again by cruel misfortune, but my love, passionate, protective, held her through it. By late October, home again, the kidnapping had forged us unbreakable. Robert's betrayal had been the final shadow. Ahead lay only light. December 20th, 2025 arrived with a gentle snow that blanketed Central Park in white silence. The kidnapping had left scars, physical on my side, deeper on Aaliyah's spirit. But time and love had begun to heal them. Our daughter was born on a crisp morning in November, her cries filling the private birthing suite with life and hope. We named her Grace Soo-jin, honoring the grandmother she would one day know, and the grace that had carried us through darkness. I held her first, tiny fingers wrapping around mine, and felt the final fracture in my soul mend. This child, born of passion, not transaction, was my redemption. The empire was fully legitimate now. Real estate, foundations, scholarships feeding children who once knew the same hunger Aaliyah had endured. No more shadows. Aaliyah recovered slowly, her body stronger than before, but forever changed by pregnancy and trauma. Nights found her waking from nightmares, memories of the warehouse, of cold apartments long ago. I held her through them, whispering promises until she slept again. The passionate love that had ignited in suspicion now anchored us completely. She was my world, Grace, our future. On this December day, we renewed our vows, not in a cold ceremony, but in a quiet gathering on a snow-dusted terrace overlooking the park. Friends from the foundation, Mrs. Han, even Soo-jin via video from Seoul. Aaliyah wore a simple white dress that flowed over her post-pregnancy curves, eyes shining as she walked toward me. No rings exchanged, we already wore them, but words spoken freely from the heart. "I choose you," she said, voice steady and warm. "Not because I had to, but because I want to, every day." I took her hands, throat tight. "You healed me, Aaliyah, you and Grace. I was powerful, wealthy, but empty. You gave me family, purpose, love." We kissed as snow fell around us, Grace cradled in Mrs. Han's arms nearby. It was not grand, but it was ours, humane, meaningful, a testament to second chances. Later, in the warmth of the penthouse, we sat by the fire. Grace slept in her bassinet, tiny breaths soft. Aaliyah leaned against me, hand on my chest. "I never thought I would have this," she said quietly. "A home, safety, love. After all those years of hunger, of cold nights wondering if tomorrow would be worse." The memory of her poverty, emaciated frame, hollow eyes, the heartbreaking injustice of a system that let a bright girl starve, still tore at me. Remorse surged, but now mingled with profound gratitude. "You taught me what matters," I said. "Knowledge of true wealth isn't money, it's family. Life lesson learned too late, but learned. Education in compassion, in humanity." She smiled, eyes soft. "Knowledge that love crosses every line. Life lesson that poverty doesn't define worth. Education in forgiveness, even of ourselves." We reflected often on these truths. Knowledge that skin color, class, past mistakes, none could block love. Life lesson that compassion heals what power cannot. Examples in building something real from broken pieces. Grace stirred, and Aaliyah lifted her gently, nursing in the firelight. I watched them, my family, and felt peace settle deep. The turmoil that had defined me quieted at last. Love had transcended everything, race, wealth, painful beginnings. It proved that humanity blooms even in the harshest soil. To all of you watching, thank you for joining this journey. Knowledge shared through stories like this reminds us of what truly matters. Life lesson: kindness changes lives. Education and empathy is the greatest gift we can give. I wish you all good health, joyful lives, and daily peace. If this story touched you, if it made you reflect on knowledge of love's power, on life lessons of redemption, on education and compassion, please like, subscribe to Crimson Romance Stories, and share with someone who needs it. We bring new tales every day. How did this story make you feel? Does it connect to real life for you? Share your thoughts and emotions in the comments. I read every one. Goodbye for now. See you in the next video.